Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of No Bull with Nobu, the All American Shaman. Nobu, what should we talk about today?
Weather.
Yeah, I suggested this, put it back on you. So we had a big snowstorm in the Northeast United States. I live in New Jersey and just dug out probably about like 2 feet of snow. What'd you get out there by you guys, Nobu?
7 or 8 inches, which, they were calling for the storm of the century. And quite frankly, it's very mild.
Yeah, I guess we got your extras this way because it was a strenuous dig out and still not totally complete. It's still coming down out here, but excited to get into this topic from more than just the straightforward, direct experience of precipitation and hear about the weather from a shamanic perspective. So, you do have any kind of baseline forays into this topic that you could start us out with here?
So if we look at, again, as above, so below, and as within, so without, looking at things from a more hermetic standpoint, per se, and we can see the weather, the external manifestation, as a reflection of the internal process. So let me ask you, JT, when it's rainy outside, how does that make you feel?
Word that jumps to mind immediately is melancholy, but sort of in a good way too, because I do enjoy the maybe it's an excuse to stay home and kind of rest and relax and take it easy. So it's like kind of got this subdued nature and effect. Maybe when I was younger, I was more upset by the fact that it was raining and couldn't go outside and play and things like that. But now I appreciate the reprieve from the need to feel like I have to be outside doing things.
Yeah. And what about the let me change the question a little bit. If you had to anthropomorphize, I know I butchered that word. If you had to give emotional human-like qualities to the earth, what would a snowstorm be in terms of an emotional expression for the planet?
I don't know what emotion would be like warmth or like comforting, but like, so it's cold and frigid, but then you get this nice, thick, fluffy blanket of white, pure goodness that settles on top of it. So maybe a little bit of kindness and warmth coming in the dead of winter is the way I like to think about it.
Yeah. And again, every single person and how they interpret, different seasons and by proxy different, states of weather is going to be different. Some people love the cold and so they go to this cold climate. Some people, hate the cold, so they go to Florida. We all have different
Right.
interpretations. That's why, again, I during this episode it's going to be a little bit more interpretive for the audience. But when combining nature with psychedelics, I have found in the past many times the parallels and coincidences to be, again, there are no coincidences in my mind, but very spectacular. You know, there's been many times where I've facilitated a psilocybin experience for someone, course over 4 or 6 hours, and where you can see that the way the ceremony is going is coinciding almost perfectly with the current state of weather. So if someone's going through a really tumultuous part of the journey, purging a lot of darkness or negativity, the weather could be very black clouds, stormy, you know, very boisterous. Whereas, you know, coming at the end of the journey, the sun starts to come out, birds are singing, and there's that palpable shift in the external, which is again reflecting the internal. Um, I would furthermore argue that how each person, experiences the weather, what they see, is also very connected to their state. Where one person living 5 miles away could have a completely different weather experience, right, than someone 5 miles away from them. It could be raining, pouring on you, but then 5 miles around, it could be sunny and bright. That is the dynamic nature of the weather, as well as that we get what we need as well, both for our area in terms of the soil, what the animals need, and then also tied into our own individual emotional expression.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of different layers to this. I'm sure like a bunch of different questions kind of popped in my head as you're talking through that. I guess the main underlying thread there is like there are impacts based on experience and maybe at like an individual level, like a collective level, like an environmental, like space level that you kind of have these dynamics at play. And I mean, with the the philosophy that all is one, all is connected, everything is kind of in relation and in context to everything else around it. Basically, there are impacts that you can have as like an individual experiencing the world around you on the weather and kind of have like this play back and forth with it. So it's kind of like the weather creates itself, or maybe like you create it, or like collectively, you and the other sentient entities, or perhaps unsentient ones as well, are kind of having that interaction with it. Is that maybe a fair assessment?
Said in a much more efficient manner than what I said. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess like how how does that happen? I mean, I guess I kind of painted a broad brush of just like everything's connected, but is there maybe something a little bit more like granular, specific you could call out there?
So, not to put my tinfoil hat on, but my hat has silver instead. One of the ways this comes to fruition and plays out is through where tension goes, energy flows. So, if I tell a bunch of people that there's going to be this effect occurring in the matrix, the mater, the mother, you know, then the chances of it occurring are much higher than if we just leave people in the dark per se. That's from my perspective what a majority of weather forecasting is really weather spellcasting, because people have so
Mm,
much belief in, that paradigm and that modality, that I would argue that that helps to manifest it. That now we have so much, individual consciousnesses all believing the same thing. Just like, again, like how there's a palpable shift in a room, and this has been documented by science as well. Like, for example, crime is lower in areas of where there are churches. It doesn't mean Christianity, it could be a mosque, it could be a temple. But generally speaking, when there are groups of people all praying for peace, that there is a greater radius of peace around that group of people who are praying for it. So that's like, a congregation of 100 or 200 maybe. So what happens when we get, thousands of people in one local news network all manifesting, believing the same thing's going to occur? It greatly enhances the probability of it. And again, this is all intertwined with the shamanic and the scientific as well. And to the audience, whatever you believe is ultimately going to be true in the end. We're just here to
mm.
open your mind to different perspectives and different layers. I live in this body and mind, and I have a hard time making sense of all the contradictions.
Right.
That's also why we're titanium. It helps to balance contradictions. But yes, it is
Yeah.
quite a strange world we live in. But when you open yourself up to these new concepts, you can see some more magic at play.
Very cool. Yeah, there's a few things there that I liked a lot. The weather spell casting and instead of forecasting kind of reminded me of the traditions back when, the droughts and then rain dances and things like that, and kind of bringing the village together if the crops needed water, and setting that intention and having that many people's consciousnesses like maybe visualizing it,
Mhm.
or trying to project it into the future to then maybe move themselves onto that timeline. I love the um, kind of view of the universe as like infinite numbers of timelines and like probabilities of them coming true. It's like whatever is the most probable one is the one that's most likely to manifest. And so, like you're saying, if you get enough people to all have that same vision for what the future is going to look like, then it just becomes more and more probable.
Mhm.
So yeah. So when we were talking about weather as well, on kind of that intermixing with the experience that someone was going through on a psychedelic journey. Is that maybe you can talk about like maybe the veil between the two interactions is like thinner as that's happening? Is that maybe why it was easier to see in like a ceremony type of space rather than in like an everyday interaction? Can you talk about that?
You hit the nail on the head as far as the veil being thinner for one, but from a more scientific standpoint, when with psilocybin, for example, increased levels of serotonin in the brain, the neuroplasticity of the brain is increased as well, and different parts, not just the hemispheres themselves, but different parts of the brain now have crosstalk that normally weren't there. So, most of us are again only using 3 to 5% of our brains, and we're not even accessing our subconscious mind. So, under the effect of psychedelics, and specifically the ones like psilocybin, bufo, ayahuasca, the ones that are very strong on interacting with serotonin, which greatly enhance your ability to see details.
Hmm.
Unashamed side note, I usually discover that my bathroom mirror is dirty after a dose of psilocybin, where I see things that I normally don't see, right? So it
Right.
enables us to connect the dots on a lot. And that's also why it's potent for shadow work and for emotional release, because we're able to see things that before we just were
Mm.
blind to. It was under your nose, it was there the whole time. You just didn't have the awareness and consciousness, the bandwidth to really perceive it and see it for what it was. So I would argue that, the weather connection with someone's internal state is always happening perpetually. I mean, I witness this in my everyday life of where, if tensions are high in a group or a room, and then all of a sudden there's a breaking point of levity, the the sun will poke out through the clouds, right? And again, some people would say, "Well, that's just coincidence, Nobu." And again, to which I say, I do not see coincidences. I see providence, Morpheus. But yeah, does that answer your question, brother?
Yeah, and it actually kind of, as you said that, like with the sun coming out, when people kind of had like this breakthrough. I mean, I guess it seems like on this show the answer is usually simultaneous because I always ask like which came first, the sun or the general change in demeanor. But maybe it's a unfolding process that happens simultaneously. Is that how you see it?
Yes, yes. The observer and the observed simultaneously become the same thing, right? So, that's the magic and beauty of synchronicity in general, is that
Mhm.
there is no causal effect, right? You didn't do a ritual to manifest the synchronicity in which things just align perfectly. It just happened. It bypasses space and time, which is I was actually working on a field for miracles, and that's one of the premises of a miracle, is that there is no direct cause and effect chain to get to the miracle. There's
Mm.
this seemingly unrelated event followed by something else. So, when we relate that, and when we're open to miracles and we're open to magic, and we're open to synchronicity, not only can we see some miraculous things when it comes to the weather, but we also see it with healing, as well.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like the perfect segue to go into what we were talking about before we started recording, and the ceremony where I first met you, and like the concept of miracles seems to line up really well with weather because, like you're saying, the cause and effect may not be very clear cut, and like often with the weather, you have these cycles and these things that kind of make sense, and they build up in storms and they move through or whatnot. But sometimes you just get this like freak weather event, seemingly inexplicable, right? And so you could call that a miracle in a lot of ways. And what we experienced, and obviously we each have a different perspective, so I'll share what happened on my side. But we were in the ceremony, and I think it was toward the end, and things were kind of like either coming to a climax or just kind of coming down and like settling or whatever it was. But the energy seemed like it needed some sort of like change transition, and it was June, right? So it was
Hmm.
really hot. It was in Colorado. We're in the mountains, but it was like a hot day outside, and we were putting like sunblock on. and then all of a sudden it just starts to hail, like snow, hail, like cold, and then we're all like huddled together. Like, what just happened? It was hot and dry, and now we're cold and wet. And then I think 10, 20 minutes later, it was back to being hot and dry again. Um, Maybe you could share your perspective of that of that weather miracle right there too.
So during we when we were all in the medicine simultaneously during that experience as well, it was a unique scenario as well. But for me personally, from my lens, because I wasn't working at that point, I was just sitting in the medicine on my own. When it started to hail, I was crying. Like, I remember I curled up by the fire in a ball and I started crying. And as soon as I started crying, the hail started coming down. But I didn't even care about the hail, even though I could feel it, hitting my skin, and because I was in my emotions. I was in my own storm. You know, that's again where I'm
Yeah.
going back to the very beginning of the external being an internal manifestation. And we've talked about this before as far as other things, but like, someone's not going to manifest true wealth, I don't think, if they're not feeling wealthy inside, and vice versa.
Mm.
You're not ever going to be perceived truly as strong by others if you don't feel strong and secure within your own skin. You can build up things to make it appear as such, but people aren't going to feel those things from you unless you truly have it within.
Right. It's like if you can't hold that frequency
Hmm.
of wealth and abundance, then you won't be able to maintain it in anything that you acquire if you aren't accepting of it and believe you deserve it, or that it's truly um, the embodiment of like what your life and what your actions are. Then yeah, odds are you'll lose it as quickly as you gained it in a lot of contexts.
Odds
Um,
are.
yeah, yeah,
But again, you're
yeah.
talking about a frequency incident. So
Ooh, I like that.
there's been a lot of etymology juice in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're coming back to, again, the spell casting, weather casting. I think that's so interesting. Is like weather is probably the most important thing for humans throughout like our earlier part of our evolution. So like as soon as humans had the wherewithal to make words, to speak, to communicate with others. I mean, it's like, what's the first thing you talk about with a stranger when you meet them in the elevator? You talk about the weather. Like, it's always the very first thing because it's something that you can both kind of relate to as unique individuals, and you have no context for like what the other person is, what their beliefs are, where they're coming from, but you can both observe what's going on outside and compare notes. And I
Hmm.
think that's a cool, always like first entree into what you're talking about with a total stranger. So like, do you have any other kind of thoughts about that, of like how as humans evolved, like along with the weather and its impact like on our cultures and things like that?
So I think I may have alluded this before, but in the first episode, but historically speaking, another aspect of a shaman is someone who has the ability, when people had lack of rain or the crops weren't doing well or even insects, they went to the shaman, their local shaman, the village's shaman, and, asked for help, and they would often, perform a rain dance or some sort of ritual or ceremony to facilitate a change in the weather. Um,
Hmm.
I have not. There's only one instrument in my. The flute seems to work best for me as far as interacting with weather, which makes sense because the flute is an air instrument. But
Hmm.
uh, it's also interesting to me that the weather being that breaking the ice, that talking point, because it's also extremely valuable information, right? Because let's go back, to when the United States was being settled. If you were a Englishman or European descent interacting with someone who's Native American, indigenous, you know, it's still regardless of what your belief system is, where you're from, what you're doing, the weather is a critical piece of intelligence, right?
Hmm.
If you have knowledge that there is a thunderstorm or tornadoes blundering in from the east, that's valuable to tell someone, right? And then again, I don't think that people have had the conscious awareness mostly that such things were again indicative or foreshadowing or reflecting internal states as well. But I think the people before knew such things. You know, if you even say like someone has a dark cloud following them, you know, they have bad luck,
Mm.
right? Whereas when someone's sunny and bright, you know, they're more happy and chipper. We see these qualities in other people all the time. We're just not connecting the dots fully on the interconnectedness between everything else as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think we talked about this a lot in the past too. Is like everybody has their own filter that kind of blocks out certain experiences that don't align with what their belief systems are. So you could have that more sunny disposition person, and they walk outside and they think it's a beautiful day out, and then you could have someone that's that more dark cloud disposition, and they think it's a horrible day. Like it just all depends on what they're expecting to see out there, and kind of how they view their own experience through their own lens of this. Maybe it's objective. Maybe it is different for everyone that experiences it. I guess we never really know because it can be so different on these like microclimate levels.
Yeah, well, the microclimate for each person. But again, as as you know this about me and everyone else should know, always there's multiple facets to look at things. You know, and again, going back to the most basic of the duality. You know, people want to celebrate the day, but they forget that night is also beautiful, right? You know, and again, you
Hmm.
can't have one without the other. You know, it's fine for someone to celebrate the sunshine, but recognize that if you had nothing but sunshine, you'd be in a desert eventually. You or you'd be in a drought and there's suffering that comes with that. Again, conversely, nothing but rain will eventually lead to flooding or, you know, potentially drowning crops and, you know, wildlife. So as taking a lesson from nature, you know, from that external experience, I encourage people to accept themselves through all their seasonal changes and emotional shifts. You know, not every day you're gonna feel bright and chipper and ready to, you know, go after it. That's fine. You know, it feel your different changes and shifts because it's bringing you through your own seasons into where you need to be. You just need to trust the process as each individual person goes through their own way.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess seasons and like climate are maybe a slightly different topic than weather. But what do you think? Should we like add that to this discussion today? Because I feel like that could open up a whole other pathway of different ideas and things like that.
So going to Nate, yeah, sure. As far as the different seasons, you know, those are on the more macro scale of the same thing. You know, we have during winter, there's that, you know, less sunlight. We're farther away from the sun in terms of experiencing the heat and the warmth and the intensity, which then changes our own what is in season, what is available, what activities can we do? We're inside more restorative, rejuvenate. What is nature doing? Well, animals are going into hibernation. Behind me is a black bear, and I often reflect on myself when I get into a more sedentary state during winter. I remind myself that bear is one of my totems and that I probably should just learn to rest at times because it's natural. You know, humans need to stop trying to shove themselves in these artificial boxes because humans are so detached from nature because of the modern civilization and, you know, cars, air conditioning, heating, housing, all these things. You know, people don't even experience weather and the seasons outside of their 66 degrees Fahrenheit to 71 of climate control. They only experience it going from their house to their vehicle and through traffic, and it still has such a profound effect on people's lives, right? Imagine how much more in tune people would be if they were actually outside more, you know, right? Or spending time in nature and observing these different animals and how they interact and respond to the changes seasonally and weekly, monthly, and daily.
Right. Yeah, and as you know, we had worked together through a few different seasons as well, and I think it was cool how you suggested to almost leverage the the climate and leverage the change in seasons to then improve the effectiveness of like your own kind of goals and personal development with it. So like in springtime when things are growing and blooming and expressing and being more externally facing and like outgoing almost, like lean into that type of behavior more so, because you might find better results and be able to kind of accelerate some of your uh, you know progress toward goals and things like that. And then, in the winter time and like fall, as things are winding down, like use that as the um, kind of counterbalance or like the ability to go inward more and like do some self-reflection and do some like inner work and like kind of go quiet and more internal focused. Can you maybe talk about that and how you work with maybe some of your life coaching clients and also like shamanistically, like when you're and like maybe people living in different climates as well. Like maybe some folks don't have the four seasons if they're living close to the equator. Could you talk about like the different approaches to those situations?
Yeah. So as far as myself, you hit the nail on the head. I was just reflecting the other day about how I haven't been creating as much as we've been in winter. I haven't been making as many Morphic fields. I haven't been putting up as many YouTube videos. And I had to remind myself again that this is a season. If there's a time to just rest and again go within, this is the time. And it's not a coincidence again that I'm feeling that way. And just reminding myself that with clients, people often feel the pressure of modern society to continually have a certain level of output because the system, demands it. But I always remind them that, like, hey, like during the winter, you need to like don't if you can't get us a break at work, take it more of a break at home. Like, don't go out of the house as much. Spend more time journaling, spend more time meditating. Because during summer, you're gonna want to be outside more. So again, lean into that energy there during summer, go out there. You're more likely to find also, a potential new mate or different relationships during the summer when people are outside more as well, just statistically. But then also, looking at it from the abundance in the crops as well, there's more food, there's more abundance, there's more energy just in the atmosphere, double entendre there in general. So you're more likely to, have success in those endeavors. But again, leaning into the cycles, leaning into, what is natural.
So if someone is like living at the equator and it's kind of like like just wet and dry season, is there? I guess you're just kind of leading into the current environment outside and like even in like day to day weather, is that kind of the same as with the season? So like in winter time, like in general, it's more like an internally focused time for a person. But like, are you basically trying to mirror the external environment with your internal state in order to have like more coherence with
Yes,
your environment?
coherence. Yeah, and not going against it. So again, if someone's in the equator and it's, even though their winter is much more mild, they still have, that period of getting less sunshine. The fruit and the foods are going to be less biophoton dense. So there's still going to be more of a regression, but less so. This is also why this is a whole nother episode. But this is also why I personally am of the belief that humans are meant to be living in, the equatorial zones because it's the most energy dense area in terms of sunlight and then also in terms of fruit. You know, it's it's abundance of energy, literally. Whereas, we go into these more, you go to Norway and they have these wild cycles where they only get like 4 hours of night at times, or it's barely night, and then it's mostly just, or again, like Alaska even as well, where it's discombobulated. But again, because again, going back to contradictions and the multiple facets of things, we live in a very magical world. There's how many different astrology signs. There's how many different, within in each sign, there's 30 to 31 days in a month. And then within each day of the month, there's 24 hours in a day. And within each of those 24 hours, there's 60 minutes and 60 seconds. And going to a human design standpoint, that means each individual person, there's I can't do the math right now off my head, but there's a lot of possibilities, right? In terms
Right.
of how just at that local level where someone lines up on the chart of astrology. And then when we look at the planets and how they influence that person, so then we go furthermore down to the planet level, like where each person is living, what energies are present there, what animals there is. So yes, it is tailored to each person where they are at. So, if you were living in the North Pole, this conversation would look a lot differently. And I would have to learn as well what the patterns are for the North Pole, what animals are there, and take the medicine for your location. But the medicine of Pennsylvania, as we just discussed earlier, 7 inches here compared to your 2 feet there, it's not the same. It's always different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's maybe kind of what I was getting at with the question is like if you find yourself in a particular place, like what is the best course of action? It seems like just being aware of the weather and the climate around you and then deducing what that impact might be on you. And if you're looking for like a different outcome or you want to change up that environment, then like actively seek out maybe something that's more in line with, I mean, you're mentioning human design and astrological signs and things like that, like determine what your best case scenario would be, where you'd be most comfortable as an individual and what types of climates and weather are either enjoyable or favorable to you, and then maybe either seek that out if possible over time, or if not, and like we mentioned on other episodes too, like go to a tanning bed if you need more sunlight in the winter, or like go into a sauna if you need more heat in the winter time. Like try to fill those gaps that might be missing for you in your current situation based on the external environment.
Yes.
Okay, cool. We can't have an episode on weather without getting into some government programs on geoengineering and weather manipulation. So, do you have any thoughts generally on that? I guess
Yeah.
I'll bring my background to it. When I first heard about it, um, I mean, I guess there's a lot of different facets to it and a lot of different approaches. But I think the first time I heard about it was they have these planes that go up into the atmosphere and blow up these bombs of like sodium iodide to cause condensation and then make it rain in areas where it normally wouldn't. And that kind of like sucks moisture from other areas and kind of leads to some weird results. But have you researched any of this geoengineering and then like its effects on just us generally down here
I
living?
I haven't researched it super in depth, but in terms of, cloud seeding and such things, like it's not hard for me to conceptualize how it would be possible. Um, Again, just as we can influence you know, the microorganism of a human being, for example, if I inject your arm with a substance, it locally spreads and has, effects throughout the system. If I pollinate or inject a part of the atmosphere, different layers of the dermis of the skin of Pachamama, I could see how there would be different effects from that causal action as well. And I can also see how there would be nefarious things at play as well. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like at the societal, like government level or whatnot, it's like, oh, like they need more rain up here. It's got a drought, so like let's just go drop a water bomb or whatever on there. But it seems like maybe the carts run away down the hill a little bit here, and there's a lot of maybe not validated necessarily, but it makes a lot of sense when you see these like crazy storms that are happening and flooding in areas and um, the 100-year storms that are happening every 1 or 2 years rather than every 100 years. Do you think that humans have maybe gotten a little bit ahead of themselves on their ability to manipulate the environment around them?
Yes. Um, One, gotten ahead of themselves in terms of not thinking about the downstream consequences, right? When you're throwing just like as humans like to put chemicals in their body, and then are woe is me when they have a variety of different diseases in the future. The same thing with like when you're dropping chemicals in the atmosphere and playing God with the earth. Well, your your hubris is quite not yours, but, the people at play is quite large because you're having an effect not just on one person, but everyone. Again, and this goes
Mhm.
back to the very beginning. You know, Mother Mother Earth is having her own emotional cycles and her own versions of purging, right? Sometimes it's necessary
Mhm.
for a human being to puke up their guts because they have something inside them that needs to get out, right? And I believe the Earth has an intelligence. So when she chooses to Pompeii a city, you know,
Mhm.
or any such disaster or catastrophe, that is for a reason, you know, that there's a reason. We may not be able to see it, but there is a reason. Just as I'm sure the colony of fleas that lives on a dog doesn't appreciate when a tsunami of pesticides comes flooding into their fur jungle. But again, we can see the reason for it, right? So
Right.
always looking at the micro, macro, cosmic dimensions and perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting on the natural disasters and thinking about it on the level of Mother Nature. Is that something in your shamanic work that you kind of have explored, like just that more consciousness of Pachamama and how it impacts like individuals and just like your day to days and being subject to different disasters that may happen naturally and kind of best ways to approach that and try to live in balance. Any suggestions there?
Just trust the process. This goes back to, before we talked about, forging oneself and just persevering through and surrendering your divine will. This is what I'm going to say. Just surrender to the process and trust the process. There is an intelligence greater than your own, my own, everyone's, and there's times where we just need to sit and receive the lesson, no matter how unpleasant it may be.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And maybe spending a little bit of time outside, like you're mentioning, we have our climate controlled worlds that we live in. So maybe putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation, being out in the cold or out in the heat, and just feeling that discomfort may have some lessons and challenges to help you grow and figure out some other riddles in your life. Any other aspects we want to, or any other paths on weather here that we want to walk down?
No, just embrace the natural flow of things.
Good advice. Thank you again, Nobu, for talking us through another topic through the eyes of the All American Shaman. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening, everybody.